All right, part two. So I think that God gets to determine the parameters for belief, for what it takes to believe him, to believe in him, and where one needs to go. And you read in Romans, it says he's already provided enough. Now, I'll tell you right, this irritates atheist apologists. It makes them really mad. They don't like being told, well, this is what you believe. I get it. I understand it, because a lot of people are not humble about this. I hear a lot about Greg Bonson. I don't know the guy, but he doesn't come off to me as very humble. And I think if you're going to be on, again, I don't know Greg Bonson. I'm not trying to put him down. I've watched some of his debates. I'm like, this guy doesn't seem very humble in the way he deals with these things. And these are big issues to be talking about and saying, hey, you know, this is what you believe. He doesn't put it that way, but there's kind of and I have a lot of agreement with Bonson on a lot of stuff. But, okay, so point number two. Dillahunty states that atheism is lack of conviction as to whether there is a God or not. This is done to shift the burden of proof. Atheism is indeed an assertion, and it happens to have no positive arguments to support itself. Ask Daniel Dennett. Okay, he did a spot on a show called Seeking Truth is the name of it, and he was asked directly, are there any positive arguments for atheism? He was like, Dennis, again, like Dillahunty, I think an honest guy, and he's like, it's more about what you can prove, and he went into burden of proof immediately. So Dillahunty, when he said this, I was like, oh, man, there were two times that Dillahunty made arguments that I thought he was above. I thought he was above two positions here. Again, obviously, you can see I really respect him as a thinker, and I was disappointed. I was like, man, I'm disappointed in him. Maybe I had too high of expectations, unrealistic, because I've just heard him so many times, and I'm like, wow, he's impressive. But this idea that atheism is lack of conviction, right? He said, he said atheism is, I'm not convinced that there's a God. All right, this is two things. It's special pleading, and it's shifting the burden of proof. The best way to see this is that we have a selection of worldviews. What are worldviews? Worldviews are assertion about the nature of the world. They are ontological statements. They are affirming an ontological status. They are positive positions, not necessarily positive arguments. It's important the distinction between those two things are very important. And atheists know they don't have positive arguments. So they shift the burden of proof by saying, I'm not convinced there's a God. Or atheism is when there's lack of evidence for a God, or anything like that. Red flags should go up immediately. Because the second fallacy here is special pleading. I don't have to defend an asserted position. This is just not true. I'm sorry. I wouldn't even continue a debate with someone who doesn't want to debate and this is why I thought it was so below him, because he loves debating. I was like, wow, by the way, if someone like Dillahunty, who loves to debate, doesn't want to debate atheism as a asserted position about the nature of the world, that there is no God, that is what atheism means. It just shows that in this particular era, he acknowledges weakness, at least tacitly. Just really incredible. So, look, there's a selection of worldviews, right? And an atheist might go, there's millions of those. No, not true. There aren't millions of them. You have pantheism, right? You have monotheism. You have atheism. You might be able to throw in agnosticism. You might be able to throw in polytheism or deism. Those are broad areas, and these other systems can relate singularly to these areas. But I have said in the past, and will continue to say, you could actually boil all worldviews into two categories. The first category is theism. Ultimate theism, we'll call it. Ultimate theism. And the second category is atheistic worldviews. Okay? So, theistic worldviews would include deism, polytheism, pantheistic views, and so forth. Atheistic systems would include, obviously, atheism, some forms of maybe Buddhism, Hinduism, couple of these. You might be able to debate animism in some of these areas, whatever the case. But at the end of the day, you have two, essentially, that you can choose from. And then you go, okay, here's what I essentially think about one of those two positions, and then start reasoning within those positions. And I argue for negative corollary. If I can show that atheism doesn't have enough explanatory power, which I believe that it doesn't, and that it's internally inconsistent, which I believe that it is, I can safely, through negative corollary, start researching theism confidently. Now, what do I mean by negative corollary? If I say to you, hey, I'm not parked in the garage, you can then derive from that, oh, the garage is empty, right? If you didn't park in the garage. Or you could derive from that, oh, it's parked outside. So or someone says, I am in the garage, you can say, okay, their car's not outside, right? That's the negative corollary. And that's how I kind of see this as a negative corollary. You can take these two general positions, they're very general, look at one and say, well, do the atheistic systems, does atheism itself, is that the best explanation for this world? Does that mean, now, if you conclude that's the case, that it isn't the best explanation, does that mean automatically theism is perfect? No, right? Or vice versa? No, it doesn't mean atheism's perfect. It doesn't mean theism's perfect. But if you, like I have concluded, that atheism simply doesn't bring enough explanatory punch, then you probably need to look the other direction. But saying, well, the definition of atheism is that it's lack of belief, that's an epistemology. That is not ontology. Atheism is a statement, a positive assertion about the nature of the world. All right, number 3. This is where the debate really begins. And Scrivener makes a profound point that in the absence, this is really good, that in the absence of God, Dostoevsky was wrong in that it's not anything is permitted, but rather, quote, everything is very puritanical. Moralism becomes more heightened. And I personally just want to make a comment about this. I think that a lot of that is fueled by social media. And I think in the case of social media, we have a lot of I don't think your average person thinks the way social media presents things. And I think with social media, we have a sort of, what the heck just happened there? Did I push all my notes? Yeah, sorry. I think in the case of social media, we have a lot of infiltrators with agendas. And that's part of the problem with it. All right. Point number 4. Scrivener points out that Dillahunty keeps referencing a particular study that is out of step with many studies. Now, I have talked about this. If you're going to bring studies, I personally, if I was bringing a study, not that you have to do this, but I would tell my opponent ahead of time, hey, I'm going to be talking about this study. I would do that. And I think if you're going to bring a study, you better be specific. Scrivener is very specific. And Dillahunty does as good of a job as anyone can in not preparing, but he admits he wasn't prepared. In terms of debate, that doesn't cut it. Saying, well, I wasn't prepared for this. But he's just being honest. Listen, I want to defend Dillahunty here. He also is saying, I don't want to get the study wrong. And I believe him. I think he's being honest. He didn't want to get the study wrong. But points to Scrivener. He just goes after Dillahunty on this point. He says he keeps referencing a particular study that is out of step with many studies. Now, I have an issue with that. And while I think Scrivener gets points on this particular thing, and again, Dillahunty shows that he has good reasons why he thinks this study is right and a high percentage of the studies are wrong. That's not entirely convincing, and it's not entirely convincing because you really have to go into some specifics. And he gets about as specific as you can without being prepared, but it doesn't matter. You're not prepared, you're not prepared. You're supposed to prepare for debate. And he did think the debate was about something in particular, to give him that. But still, I was kind of shocked he wasn't prepared for this because he's really good. Okay, he does come prepared for a broad range of issues. And I think, though, in Scrivener here, even though I think he won on this particular point, I think this could be the Gadarene swine flu fallacy. And let me explain what that is. Swine flu. Did I put swine flu? Gadarene swine flu fallacy. Oh no! You're going to get sick if you don't know the Gadarene swine fallacy. Basically, it means this. So let's say you have birds flying in a pattern, and they're going to a particular destination, flying south for the winter, right? And one goes off the pattern. Would you conclude that the one's not going to arrive at the, the South Pole or whatever, not South Pole, wherever, south where they're going? Why? Why would you conclude that? It doesn't mean that that's the case. And so I could be wrong, but it seems like when he says 89%, literally 89% of these studies push one direction and you're picking this one study. I wonder if Scrivener's kind of stepped in this issue a little bit because it's like, I mean, he does say it's a univariate analysis, which basically means it picks one element, and that's an interesting point. I could be wrong. Maybe he's not falling under this fallacy, but this is what I don't like about these kind of things. It's like I'd have to look at the studies myself, and I'm not going to look at all these studies, and neither are you, no matter who you are watching this. You could be one of the people that done one of these studies, and you're not going to look at all these studies. All right. So, point 5. Dillahunty says, we do some funny things with language. Then he keys in on the word higher, right? You don't believe in a higher power than yourself, Matt? I understand where he's coming from a little bit here. He's saying, why would you think I'm an egoist? Why would you think I'm arrogant? You don't believe in a higher... Because when people accuse him of this, that's probably what they mean. And he seems to think this is a question about being egocentric. But it would seem that he's the one doing something kind of funny with language. By higher, the question is ontological in nature. That is that man must root himself in something morally greater to prevent from being autocratic. Okay? So being autocratic is a problem because that's where you end up with megalomaniacs. I'm not saying that about Dillahunty. I'm saying that's how you end up with... History has shown us this is how you end up with problematic people. Now, Dillahunty claims that there are things he values, but why decide? But why decides what the value other than himself, and how does that avoid relativism? See, why does he decide what that value is? Why that value is higher than himself, and how does that avoid relativism? How does it avoid being autocratic? What makes it higher than himself? He gets to decide what's higher. So claiming something that's higher doesn't make it higher because it's contingent on you. You see? He eventually settles on community, right? But that also leads to relativism. Consider again the anthrocentric fallacy. Human concerns conflated with ultimate concerns. So yeah, the anthrocentric fallacy just says, you're taking human concerns and saying that they're ultimate concerns. Community would be a good example. there have been plenty of communities that have believed things that we would consider morally abhorrent. When we prosecuted the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials, we did it on the basis that there's a greater law. We didn't do it on the basis of culture. When they defended themselves, they did it on the basis of their own shared beliefs in a community. It's a problem, okay? And they are going to pick up on this. You have to remember, when you talk about ethics, after studying ethics all this time, you have to remember, when it comes to ethics, eventually you're going to talk about the Holocaust. It's just too important of an issue. That's how important it is. So he goes on to claim that what is above him is what he values, like this community project he's working on, which sounds like a noble effort, by the way, because they're dealing with people who, you know, have lost their faith and are considering suicide and stuff. So, look, let's admit, I'm glad there's somebody out there taking care of these people. I mean, I want them to have faith. If you lose the body, if you lose the soul, who cares if you keep the body for a temporary period of time? But still, we should care about individuals. And so I am glad, you know, we need to be praying for them, but I am also glad that there's someone out there trying to offer them communal support in some degree. That is a case in point of being autocratic, right? So what is above him is what he values, and that is being autocratic. Finally, being autocratic is not to be confused with solipsism or immoral egoism, or even like Ayn Rand's egoism, okay? It is an auto-anthrocentric authoritarianism. And all I mean by that is, by autocrat, I also don't mean dictator, right? What I mean by being autocratic is just saying, I am the arbiter of what is valuable and what is right and what is wrong, and appealing to community with yourself being the arbiter of whether the community has determined what's right or wrong or not. And it doesn't, that's just saying it. That doesn't cut it. Again, he's not here to defend himself, but as far as I can tell, it's a very weak point for Dillahunty here. Again, I'm going to spend almost the entire time here dealing with him. Number 6, before I move on to part 3. Dillahunty claims the effects of prayer and meditation. He claims that they're actually helping. Now, when you first hear him say this, you're like, wow. Well, what he says is that, let's say you're in a cave-in and you start praying. It'll have a calming effect. And he says, so what difference does it make if you're praying or meditating? He says it will have a calming effect, and therefore it's effective. This is to deal with studies. Okay, I think this is an apologetic for him in dealing with studies that have shown that prayer is useful. And I'm glad for atheistic opponents like Dillahunty on things like this. We don't pray because it's helpful. That's not why we pray. Jesus, when he was in the garden, prayed that God, the Father, would deliver him from this, from what he had to face. Was it effective? Well, he was sweating blood, number 1. Number 2, didn't happen that way. Well, I thought we prayed to be effective. No, we pray to commune with God. I don't care if it's effective. What do you mean effective? If effective means I get to commune with God, yes, it's effective. There you go. So you have to see, this is why I talk about arguing from the periphery. Or what this would be presuppositional. Generally, it's called presuppositional apologetics, but I call it arguing from the periphery. I just don't agree that the point of prayer is that it's helpful. And Christians that do, I think, don't understand what prayer is. So these studies that show that prayer is helpful, what's the point? I don't get that. If you're only praying because you think it's helpful, don't get me wrong. If you're out there and you're struggling and you want to pray about it, you should absolutely do that. But I'm saying that that's not the only reason we pray. Even if one were to die, what was the purpose of prayer? Mere survival? So important to point out that the atheist wants to redefine atheism as lack of belief, or not possessing conviction, or not convinced there is a God. So that we must accept their definition of prayer and its teleology. They get mad when we say they already have what it takes to believe in God, but then claim there already exists what it takes to be an atheist. You see? So this is just very interesting to me, that why should we accept their definitions of what the purpose of prayer is? We shouldn't. Just like we shouldn't accept their definitions of what atheism is. Okay, so this sort of shifting of the burden of proof. So again, I want to hone in on this one last part here. They get mad when we say they already have what it takes to believe in God, but then claim there already exists what it takes to be an atheist. See what I'm saying here? It just shows that they don't have to defend atheism broadly as a positive assertion, and then just make this assumption when they cover things like prayer as being pragmatically effective, and I'm supposed to accept that definition. But if I say to them, you already have what it takes to believe in God, you already in some sense have that sensus divinitatis, they get mad. But they're being hypocritical. It's doing the same thing. So I think ultimately, I would say that Dillahunty here is intellectually hypocritical, not morally hypocritical. Or maybe there's no distinction there. I'm not sure. I just don't want to call him a hypocrite out of respect. But I just think it's hypocritical. And again, if he were here, if he were to ever see this, he could respond, I would imagine. But that's the best I can do without him being here to respond. So.